My son-in-law, Bryce, slid the folder across the picnic table between the hot dogs and the potato salad. Cream-colored. He leaned in with that rehearsed smile and said it low enough that nobody at the grill heard him. Sign, or we tell your whole town what you did. I opened it. The paper was warm from sitting in the sun. Typed allegations. Dates I recognized from a life I'd buried. And on the second page, my brother Thomas's name in flowing cursive script. My hands went still under the table. My jaw locked so hard my teeth ached. Thomas has never written cursive, not once in 44 years. He prints in block capitals, steady and proud, the same way he printed his name on the Special Olympics sheet at 12. Across the yard, Thomas handed a sparkler to a neighbor's kid. I closed the folder, said nothing. But to understand what I did next, you need to understand what I'd spent a dozen years hiding in plain sight. Davalos Auto sits on 2 1/3 acres of dirt off the secondary strip on Picacho Avenue. My father hung the sign 40 years ago. Hand-painted, black letters on white wood, no logo. The paint cracks every few summers, and I touch it up with the same enamel he used. The hydraulic lifts are newer than the sign, but older than most of the cars they hold. 2 bays, a parts room, an office with a metal desk, and a coffee maker that's outlived 2 marriages in this town. Thomas runs the front. My older brother, 44 years old, born with Down syndrome and more reliable than any employee I've ever had. He wears a clean shop polo with his name badge pinned straight every morning, and he greets every customer who walks through that door by name. Not first name, full name, Mr. Gutierrez, Mrs. Padilla. He remembers their kids' names too, and their dogs. His corner of the shop has a broom, a stool, and a pegboard he labeled himself. Every wrench on that board has a strip of masking tape underneath it with the size written in Thomas's handwriting, block capitals. Careful, square, each letter pressed hard enough to leave grooves in the tape. He signs the shop login sheet every morning the same way. Thomas Davalos. Printed. Always printed. Past the lifts, past the tool carts that smell like WD-40 and hot brake dust, there's a workbench I built against the back wall. Jeweler's loupes sit next to impact wrenches, tiny flathead screwdrivers in a leather roll beside a 3/4-inch socket set. 40 antique pocket watches in a glass front cabinet above the bench, each one logged in a leather notebook. Date, acquired, original owner if I could trace it. What was wrong with it? An 1890s Elgin Railroad watch I found at an estate sale 2 years ago. Hairspring corroded past what most people would attempt. I spent 11 evenings bringing it back, every piece in the right place. My wife Carmen died when our daughter Marisol was 9. Aneurysm, middle of a Tuesday, gone before the ambulance crossed the river. I raised Marisol alone after that, packed her lunches, drove her to school, sat in the front row at every recital with engine grease still under my fingernails because some days the shop ran late and the recital didn't wait. Before Las Cruces, before the shop, I worked as a forensic engineer for an insurance investigation firm in El Paso. Developed survey methods, filed 2 patents, built something that had my name on it for the right reasons. Then, a colleague I'd trusted filed accusations. Broad allegations with my name on them. I sat in a conference room on Montana Avenue while a man I'd shared lunch with for 3 years read charges off a sheet he couldn't look me in the eye to deliver. Every charge was invented. The investigation dragged 4 months before the accuser's story finally fell apart in a single deposition. But by then, the damage was done. Nobody remembers the acquittal. They remember the accusation. I came home, bought the shop from my father's estate, built a life where I controlled every variable. Every quarter, I drive to El Paso, 45 minutes on I-10 through desert scrub and truck stops. I meet with a woman in an office downtown, sign what needs signing, and drive back the same day. Been doing it for over a decade. Nobody in Las Cruces asks where I go. People in small towns respect a man's routine as long as he shows up for work the next morning. The shop doesn't explain everything. A mechanic on a dirt lot doesn't keep a second account at a credit union across the state line. Doesn't pay off his house in 6 years on brake jobs and oil changes. Doesn't turn down the big commercial fleet contracts because he doesn't need the volume. I'm careful with money in a way that has nothing to do with being frugal and everything to do with keeping two lives separate. The weight of it sits between my shoulder blades some nights, a tightness that doesn't ease until I'm back in the shop with a watch movement under the loupe and my hands doing work that makes sense. Marisol married Bryce Latham 2 years ago. My daughter, 27, a school teacher with her mother's dark eyes, and my habit of saying less than she thinks. Bryce was green-eyed and clean-shaven, the kind of handsome that comes with practice. He sold real estate for his father's company. The courtship moved fast. I had reservations, something in the back of my teeth when I shook Preston Latham's hand at the engagement dinner. His father, 62 years old, blazer over an open collar, gold Rolex he adjusted 3 times during the toast. He laughed with his whole chest and called me son before dessert arrived. His wife Diana sat beside him with a mouth that smiled and eyes that counted silverware. After the wedding, the Lathams started coming to every family event: 4th of July, Marisol's birthday, Sunday dinners. Preston would clap me on the shoulder and talk about the brisket while his eyes measured the property line, not admiring it, pricing it. The same way a man looks at a car he intends to buy from someone who doesn't know what it's worth. I noticed. I didn't say anything. That's not how I operate. You don't pull a watch apart because you suspect a problem. You listen first, wait for the skip in the rhythm to tell you where to look. The following Tuesday, Bryce showed up at the shop with a tape measure and a surveyor's map. He didn't ask permission to walk the property line. Before the story continues, tap subscribe and tell me what time it is where you are. Thank you for being part of this. He was already halfway around the east corner when I rolled under the Civic. Tape measure, pulled to its full length, numbers written on the surveyor's map he'd spread across the hood of his Audi. 2 1/3 acres, measured to the inch. Thomas saw him from the shop bay, waved, called out the way he calls out to everyone. "Hi, Bryce, you want water? It's hot." Bryce didn't look up, didn't wave back, didn't turn his head. He wrote another number on his map, snapped the tape measure closed with a metallic click that carried across the lot, and moved to the next corner. Thomas stood there with his hand still half raised, then lowered it and went back to sweeping. I watched from under the Civic, my jaw locked. Heat climbed the back of my neck and settled at the base of my skull. This man had put my brother's name on a document my brother could never have signed, and now he was measuring the ground beneath Thomas's feet without the decency to look at him. I finished the oil change. Walked over, wiping my hands on a rag. "You know, Sal," Bryce said, rolling up the map, "this lot's got serious potential. Dad's offering above market. Way above. You could set Tomas up somewhere comfortable, buy yourself a place with less overhead." "I'm good," I said. He came back the following Tuesday. Same pitch, different angle. Think about Marisol's future. Think about retirement. Think about what this land could do for the whole family. The week after that, He brought comps from the county assessor, leaned against the shop door frame, pushed his sunglasses up onto his head like he owned the shade. See what the parcels on either side sold for? You're sitting on a gold mine. Every time, I said the same thing. I'm good. Every time. He smiled like he hadn't heard me. While Bryce kept coming Tuesdays, Diana opened a second front. She started taking Marisol to lunch. Wednesdays at a restaurant on Main Street where the napkins were cloth and the portions were decorative. I didn't know about the lunches until Marisol mentioned them at dinner one Sunday. Diana thinks you work too hard, Dad, she said. You should be thinking about what comes next. What comes next? For what? For Tomas. Marisol set down her fork. She says Tomas deserves to be around people who understand him. Activities, socialization, people his own age. The words landed in my chest like a cold stone. Not the words themselves. The source. My daughter was repeating sentences that had been placed in her mouth at a restaurant I'd never been invited to by a woman who called Tomas the slow one when she thought no one could hear. I set down my fork, looked at my daughter, her mother's dark eyes, full of someone else's ideas. I recognized the pattern. Reframe loyalty as stubbornness. Make the target doubt the person protecting them. It was the same playbook as the folder on the picnic table, just quieter. Diana's very thoughtful, I said. Pass the rice. That night, after Marisol left, I locked the shop and went to the back workbench. Pulled the cream-colored folder from behind the watch cabinet where I'd tucked it after the barbecue. Spread it under the magnifying lamp. I took my phone and photographed every page. Held the phone steady, the way I used to steady a transit rod on a job site. Each shot captured the GPS coordinates and timestamp in the metadata. The shutter clicked. Page 1, front and back. Page 2, with Tomas's name in that flowing cursive. Page 3, with the notary seal. I shot the seal at 3 angles, catching the embossed ridges of the stamp number in the shadow cast by the lamp. Then I put the folder in the safe. Floor bolted, fireproof, behind the parts room door. The kind of safe a mechanic doesn't need, and a forensic engineer does. I went back to the photos on my phone and zoomed in on the notary stamp. Gold embossing, a 7-digit registration number pressed into the paper. I wrote the number in my leather notebook below the last watch entry and drew a line separating it. Different kind of repair now. The signature on the witness statement was practiced. Loupes and flourishes, the kind of penmanship they used to teach in Catholic school. Sal Davalos, it read, in a hand that belonged to someone who'd worked at cursive until it flowed like water. I walked to my kitchen and opened the drawer where I kept things that mattered. Birthday cards. Thomas had given me every year since he was old enough to hold a marker. Happy birthday, Sal. Block capitals. Each letter pressed into the cardstock hard enough to leave grooves you could feel with your fingertip. His shop sign in sheets going back 9 years. Sal Davalos. Printed. Every single day. His Special Olympics registration from 2019. Name, address, emergency contact. All block letters, all caps, the handwriting of a man who takes pride in being careful. I laid the fabricated signature next to a birthday card and photographed them side by side. The contrast was so obvious, it was almost obscene. One signature was art. The other was Tomas. The Doña Ana County Sheriff's Office smelled like burnt coffee and copier toner. Deputy Angela Weeks sat behind a plexiglass partition at a metal desk with a small American flag stuck in a penholder. Mid-30s, dark hair pulled back, professional. She listened to everything without interrupting. I laid out the folder, the photographs, the birthday cards. The notary stamp is registered, I said. The signature is physically impossible for my brother to produce. He has Down syndrome. He prints in block capitals. He always has. Weeks picked up the birthday card, then the faked statement, held them side by side, the same way I had. Mr. Davalos, she said, I believe you, but the folder alone doesn't constitute criminal extortion under New Mexico law. The threat has to be specific, and the demand has to be for something they're not legally entitled to ask for. Right now, this reads as a civil dispute. I'm sorry. Something heavy settled behind my ribs. Not anger. Something lower, duller, like a weight dropped into still water. So someone fakes my disabled brother's signature, and there's nothing you can do. She set the papers down. Not yet. If they make a specific threat tied to a demand, if they escalate, call me. She handed me her card. I mean that. I drove back to the shop. Sat in the truck in the parking lot for a long time. The sun was going down behind the Oregon mountains, and the light turned the dirt lot orange. My hands rested on the steering wheel. Still, the tightness between my shoulder blades had spread into my arms, into my fingers, a low current running through me with nowhere to go. The system would not help me. Not yet. Not until the Lathams did something worse than what they'd already done. That evening, I went inside and opened my laptop, searched the New Mexico Secretary of State's notary database, typed in the 7-digit number from the stamp. The screen loaded. The notary registration belonged to a woman named Carla Munoz. Current employer, Latham Land Group, LLC. Duration of employment, 8 years. Not Bryce acting alone. Not some freelance favor. Preston's own company, his own paralegal, his own notary stamp on a document bearing the name of a man with Down syndrome who prints in block capitals. Company-wide. Deliberate. Traceable. I picked up my phone and scrolled to a number I hadn't dialed in months. Rita Espinoza, my patent attorney at Davalos Technical Holdings, the woman in the El Paso office I visited every quarter. Rita, I need you to pull every licensing agreement connected to Latham Land Group, parent company, subsidiaries, subcontractors. Everything. Silence on the line. Then her voice, different than I'd ever heard it. Latham, Sal, why are you asking about Latham? Just pull the agreements. I'll explain when I see you. Rita said she'd have them by next week. Rita called back 3 days early. Her voice was tight, controlled. Sal, do you know how much Latham pays us annually? $8 million, Rita said. Give or take, annually. I sat across from her desk in the El Paso office, 4th floor, filing cabinets on every wall. She had the licensing agreement spread in front of her, a dozen folders fanned open like a hand of cards. Latham Land Group, Latham Development, LLC, Latham Masilla Holdings, 3 subsidiaries, 7 subcontractors, all of them pulling surveys off your patents, Sal. Every project they've broken ground on in the last 15 years used your technology. I picked up the nearest folder, flipped through the payment history, quarterly transfers, 6 figures each, deposited into Davalos Technical Holdings, and forwarded through the same credit union I'd been visiting for a decade. How many active projects? I asked. 3. Rita pulled a sheet from under the stack. Combined value, roughly $24 million. The Mesilla corridor is the big one. That's the 8-figure deal. None of them can proceed without your survey data. The contracts are clear. 30-day revocation clause, standard termination, no cause required. So Preston Latham has been paying me to build his empire. Rita took off her reading glasses, and he has no idea. The LLC is anonymous. Patent filings list you by number, not name. As far as Preston knows, he's licensing from a faceless holding company. Something shifted behind my ribs. Not satisfaction, like pulling a watch apart and finding a second set of gears running underneath the first. Preston had walked onto my dirt lot, clapped me on the shoulder, called me son, and measured my property with his eyes. And every dollar he used to fund that ambition passed through my hands first. Rita set a single sheet of paper on the desk between us. I already knew Preston's people were behind the forged document. Carla Munoz, his own notary, had stamped it. But what Rita laid in front of me was something else. The El Paso case. The colleague who filed the fraud accusations against you 12 years ago. Martin Ochoa, I said. The name still tasted like copper. I pulled his records when you asked about Latham. Martin Ochoa was Preston Latham's business partner from 2008 to 2013. 3 joint ventures. 2 shared LLCs. Ochoa filed those accusations 4 months after Preston acquired the first parcel on the Manila corridor. I picked up the paper. Ochoa's name next to Preston's on an LLC registration dated 14 months before the accusations landed on the conference room table in El Paso, before the 4 months of investigation, before the deposition that collapsed his story, before I came home to Las Cruces and bought the shop. My hands went flat on Rita's desk. I stared at them until the knuckles sharpened into focus. The notary told me Preston wanted my land. This told me he'd wanted it before I even owned it. 13 years. Preston had been circling my property for over 13 years. He'd sent Ochoa to destroy my career first, driven me back to Las Cruces, and then waited. The forgery, Bryce, the folder at the barbecue. That was the end game of something that started before Marisol finished high school. The blood drained from my face, down through my jaw, my neck, my chest, until my hands felt like they belonged to someone else. Rita pulled out another sheet. Her voice was careful now, the way mine gets when I'm about to tell a customer the engine block is cracked. Bryce and Marisol. I pulled the Yvette records for the charity gala where they met. The Latham Family Foundation sponsored the event. Guest list was curated. Marisol was invited through a teaching award that Preston's foundation funded. My mouth opened. Nothing came out. My hands sat flat on Rita's desk, and I watched them like they were evidence. My daughter in her wedding dress, dancing with Bryce under the string lights I'd hung in the backyard. The way she'd looked at me before walking down the aisle. The way Bryce had shaken my hand and called me Dad for the first time. All of it staged. A 10-year acquisition strategy that used my daughter as the final closing document. What do you want to do? Rita asked. I looked at the licensing agreements. $24 million in projects. 3 developments, 30 days notice, banks calling loans, subcontractors filing liens. I ran the numbers the way I run diagnostics on an engine that's misfiring on 3 cylinders. Not yet, I said. 4 days later, Bryce came to the shop. It was after closing. Thomas had gone home. The lot was empty except for my truck and Bryce's Audi, white as a filing cabinet, parked at an angle that blocked the bay doors. He walked in without knocking. Sal, we need to talk. I was cleaning a carburetor at the bench. Didn't look up. Go ahead. My dad's not a patient man, Sal. You know that. He's been generous with the offer. Way above market. But there's a timeline on this, and we're running out of room. I dipped a brush in solvent. Scrubbed a jet passage clean. Just sign the papers, he said. We're family. The word family came out of his mouth the way a number comes out at auction. I set the brush down. Bryce walked to Thomas's corner, stopped in front of the pegboard. ran his finger along the masking tape labels. Each wrench outlined in marker, each size written in Thomas's block capitals. The stool where my brother sat every morning. The broom handle worn smooth by his hands. "You know," Bryce said, "Dad's already talked to some group homes. Real nice places. Activities, socialization, people who understand his situation." He turned to face me. "Just in case you need help with the situation." The situation. That's what he called my brother. A situation. My hand found the wrench on the workbench. A 12-inch combination wrench, chrome vanadium, cold and solid. My fingers closed around it, and my knuckles went white. The heat climbed my neck like voltage running through a wire. My jaw locked so hard, my molars ground against each other, and pain shot through my temples. 6 words. "I own the patents your father pays for." I could feel them stacked on my tongue. I could picture Bryce's face collapsing. 6 words, and this man would never smile at me again. I held the wrench for 10 seconds. 15. Then I set it down on the bench. Wiped my hands on the rag. "I need to think about it," I said. Bryce smiled. The same practice smile from the wedding photos. "Good. That's smart, Sal. Take your time, but not too much time." He walked out. The Audi started, backed up, crunched across the dirt lot, and was gone. I stood at the bench. My jaw ached. My hands shook at my sides. The shop was silent except for the compressor cycling off and the distant hum of Picacho Avenue. The lifts were cooling with faint ticks of contracting metal, solvent drying on the workbench. I breathed through my teeth and watched Thomas's pegboard, the neat labels, the careful block letters, the stool where a man who hands sparklers to children sits every morning and does his job. 10 minutes I stood there, maybe longer. That night I drove to Marisol's house. Her car was in the driveway. I parked on the street, walked up the front path, and came around through the side gate. Gravel under my boots. The night air was cool and dry, the kind of autumn evening where sound carries. Through the wrought iron fence, I could see the back patio. Bryce was pacing, phone in hand, speaker on. "Dad, it's done." He's rattled. You should have seen his face. He didn't say a word. Preston's voice came through the speaker, tinny and clear in the night air. "Good. The mechanic either signs or he doesn't, but either way, we get that land." I stood in the dark by the gate. Didn't move. Didn't breathe. I opened the recording app on my phone and held it toward the patio. Bryce kept talking. Preston kept answering. 3 minutes of timeline, strategy, and the Manila deal by name. Back in the truck, I played the recording twice. Bryce's voice, confident and easy. Preston's voice, dismissive and certain. The mechanic. The land. Either way, I opened my leather notebook, turned to a blank page, and began writing a list of names. Carla Munoz, Martin Ochoa, every subcontractor in the Manila corridor, every person Preston had used, and every person he'd burned. By the time I stopped writing, the list filled both sides of the page. Rita had the revocation notices drafted by the time I arrived. 14 entities, 30-day termination. She slid them across the desk like ammunition. "I've had a standard revocation template since the day we set up the licensing pool," she said. "Never thought we'd use it." I signed where she indicated. Then I pulled out the leather notebook and opened it to the list of names I'd written after the recording. The list filled both sides of the page. Carla Munoz, Martin Ochoa, every subcontractor in the Manila corridor, every person Preston had used. But it was the names I didn't recognize that interested me. property owners in Doña Ana County who'd sold land along the corridor over the past decade. County assessor records are public. So are deed transfers. I spent the next week doing something different. Not mechanical work, not watch repair, research. 3 names stood out. 3 parcels sold below market value within 18 months of each other. Each seller had owned their property for over 20 years. Each sale went through a different LLC that traced back to Latham Land Group within 2 layers of corporate registration. I called the first name, disconnected number. The second, a man named Garza who'd moved to Albuquerque, hung up when I mentioned Preston Latham. His breathing changed before the line went dead. The third name was Helen Cordero, retired schoolteacher. Her parcel had been a family homestead on the south end of the corridor, sold to a Latham LLC 3 years ago for 60 cents on the dollar. She answered on the second ring. Mrs. Cordero, my name is Sal Davalos. I own property on the Manila corridor, and I believe Preston Latham used the same tactics on you that he's using on me. Silence. Then a sound I recognized. The sound of someone who's been carrying something heavy for years and just heard the lock click open. My grip tightened on the phone. Something loosened behind my ribs that I hadn't known was clenched. I kept everything, she said. Her voice shook, but not from weakness. Every letter, every threat, the document they slid under my door at midnight. I kept it all because I knew someday someone would ask. She told me about the fabricated code violations, the anonymous complaints to the county inspector, the letter from a lawyer she'd never heard of claiming her deed had a flaw, a forged signature from her late husband on a document dated 3 years after his death. The same playbook, different victim. I drove to her house in Anthony, 20 minutes south. Small adobe, chain-link fence, cottonwood dropping leaves on the walk. She was waiting on the porch with a banker's box on the table beside her. Helen Cordero was in her mid-60s, small-framed, with reading glasses hanging from a beaded chain. She'd taught 4th grade for 31 years. Her hands were steady when she opened the box. Inside, a folder of threatening letters, copies of the forged document, photographs of the midnight delivery, and a journal with dates, times, and descriptions of every interaction with Latham's people. Teacher's handwriting. Careful. Complete. Nobody believed me, she said. I went to the sheriff. They said it was a civil matter. I recognized the phrase. Deputy Weeks had used the same words. Mrs. Cordero, I said, it's not a civil matter anymore. There are 3 of you. A pattern changes the legal classification. She pressed her lips together and nodded once. Then she pushed the box across the table toward me. Use all of it. I drove back to Las Cruces with Helen's box on the passenger seat. 3 victims, 3 sets of forged documents, 3 forced sales below market value. All roads back to Latham Land Group. The case had grown from a single incident into something the DA's office couldn't wave away. Serial forgery, documented pattern, witnesses willing to testify. Monday morning, I pulled into the shop lot at 7. The sun was just clearing the Oregon mountains, and the light was flat and white across the dirt. Something was wrong before I opened the truck door. The back of the shop, the door. The lock plate was intact, but the deadbolt was retracted. No tool marks on the frame. No pry damage. Someone had worked the combination or had a key made. I pushed the door open with my boot and stood in the threshold. Parts room. The safe. The heavy fireproof box I'd bolted to the concrete floor was standing open. Its door swung wide. The dial lock showed no damage. The interior was empty. The cream-colored folder was gone. The air left my lungs like someone had put a knee on my chest. I put my hand on the edge of the safe door, and the metal was cold under my palm. Cold, the way metal gets overnight when nobody's there to keep the heat on. They'd come in the dark, work the combination patient and precise, while I slept 8 miles away. Bryce. Had to be. Preston wouldn't dirty his own hands, and Bryce had been in the shop enough times to watch me open the safe, to memorize the sequence. Surgical, targeted. I pulled out my phone, scrolled to the photographs. GPS, stamped, time-coded, metadata embedded. Every page still there, every angle, every shadow of the notary embossing. My breathing slowed by degrees. The digital copies existed. Rita's certified copies were filed with the State Patent Office in Santa Fe. Paralegal's notary records existed independently in the Secretary of State's database. I called Rita. They broke into the shop. The originals are gone. Silent. Then her voice level as a surveyor's transit. The GPS stamped photographs have chain of custody metadata. My certified copies are filed. The notary registration is a state record. They can't steal that. She was right. Legally, the evidence chain was intact. 3 independent sources, none of them in Bryce's reach. But I stood in my shop with the safe hanging open and the back door unlocked by someone who'd watched me close enough to learn the combination, and the air tasted different. Motor oil and metal, same as always. The compressor hummed. Thomas's pegboard hung on the wall with every wrench in its place. Nothing else had been touched. They'd come for the folder and nothing else. This shop was the one space I'd built to be safe. My father's sign out front. Thomas's stool. The watch bench. Carmen's picture on the office wall. All of it inside these walls because I'd decided these walls were the boundary, and someone had walked through them in the dark like they meant nothing. I locked the back door with a padlock from the parts room and called Deputy Weeks. Brought her the full evidence package. The GPS stamped photographs, Helen Cordero's records, the 2 other victims, the phone recording of Bryce and Preston, the paralegal's notary trail. Weeks spread it across her desk and studied it for a long time. 3 victims with the same playbook, she said. Same company, same forged documents, same pressure campaign. That's a pattern. That's what gets the DA interested. She looked up. I'm sending this today. Criminal forgery at minimum. Pattern of prior victims elevates it to something they can't ignore. That evening, I sat at the watch workbench. The shop was dark except for the single work lamp clamped to the bench edge. I held the 1890s Elgin in my palm. 11 evenings of work. Every piece in the right place. I thought about Marisol, her wedding day, the way she looked at Bryce under the string lights in my backyard, her mother's dark eyes full of something I wanted to believe was real. Sending those notices would collapse every project Preston owned. It would also collapse my daughter's marriage. Marisol would learn the truth about the man she loved, and she would never look at the world the same way. What would she look like when she found out? That the man who danced with her, who called me dad, who brought wine to Sunday dinner with rehearsed tasting notes, had been sent to her the way you send a surveyor to a property you intend to acquire. I thought about Thomas. Last Sunday, he'd asked me when Bryce was coming to visit. He'd set an extra place at the table without being told. The watch was warm from my hand. I turned it over. The case was scratched and dented from 100 years of pockets and nightstands and hands that weren't careful. But inside, every piece was in the right place. I set the Elgin down on the bench, picked up my phone, opened the photograph of page 2. Thomas's name in flowing cursive, loopes and flourishes. The signature of a man who doesn't exist, placed on a document by people who thought Thomas was a tool to be used because nobody would fight for him. The screen glowed under my thumb, and the heat climbed from my chest into my jaw, slow and certain. I called Rita. She answered on the first ring. Send the notices. 2 words. She didn't ask if I was sure. Rita filed everything that afternoon. By morning, 30 days would start counting down. Preston Latham was already out of time. He just didn't know it yet. Preston called on a Wednesday. His voice had that boardroom tone, the one designed to make the person on the other end feel summoned. We need to sit down, Sal. My office. Tomorrow morning. Come to the shop, I said. Silence. 3 full seconds of it. Preston Latham didn't get told where to go. He told other people. The shop? He repeated. 9 o'clock. I hung up first. He pulled onto the dirt lot at 9:15, a black Escalade with tinted windows and chrome running boards, parked diagonal across 2 spots. Through the open rear window, I could see a framed map mounted behind the driver's seat. Civil War battlefield. Antietam, or Gettysburg, one of his trophies from the study where he played general. He'd brought it the way some men bring a flag, a reminder of who he thought he was. Preston stepped out in a navy blazer, open collar, Italian loafers that collected dust before he'd taken 3 steps. Bryce came around from the passenger side, polo shirt, sunglasses pushed up. Both of them walked toward the bay doors like they were crossing a lobby. Thomas was at his pegboard, organizing ratchets. He looked up and waved. Hi, Mr. Latham. Hi, Bryce. You want water? Neither of them answered him. I was sitting on my stool at the workbench. Didn't stand, didn't move. A manila folder sat closed on the bench beside me. The weight of it under my fingers was nothing. What it contained was everything. Preston stopped 6 feet away and adjusted his cuffs. He looked around the shop the way he always did, measuring. Let's talk business, son. Name your price for the lot, and we'll forget the whole misunderstanding. I picked up a rag, folded it once, set it down. You employ a paralegal named Carla Munoz, I said. She's been with Latham Land Group for 8 years. Her notary stamp is registered with the Secretary of State under a 7-digit number I've memorized. Preston's smile held, but the muscles underneath it shifted. The shop went quiet. No compressor cycling, no traffic from Picacho, just Preston's breathing and the space between my words. Bryce uncrossed his arms. That stamp, I said, appears on a witness statement bearing the signature of my brother Thomas. The statement is written in flowing cursive. Preston, my brother has Down syndrome. He prints in block capitals. He has printed in block capitals his entire life. I have birthday cards, shop logs, and Special Olympics forms going back 20 years that prove it. The cursive on your document belongs to whoever you paid to forge it. The ruddy color in Preston's cheeks didn't drain all at once. It went in stages. The forehead first, then the jaw, then the skin around his mouth, like watching a tide pull out. There are 3 other property owners in Doña Ana County who kept records, I said. Helen Cordero, Mr. Garza, a 3rd family I won't name yet. Same playbook, fabricated threats, forged documents, forced sales below market value. All of them trace back to your company within 2 layers of corporate registration. That's not a civil matter, Preston. That's a pattern. The DA's office has the full evidence package. Bryce shifted his weight. His eyes moved to his father. I also have a recording, I said. Your son on his back patio, phone on speaker, talking to you about how the mechanic either signs or he doesn't. But either way, we get that land. Preston's hand went to his Rolex, not to check the time. His fingers closed around it and held on. Bryce's head snapped toward his father. The look between them lasted 2 seconds and said everything. I opened the manila folder on the workbench, spread the pages where Preston could see them, licensing agreements, payment schedules, corporate registration documents for an LLC he'd never heard of and had been paying for 15 years. Davalos, Technical Holdings, I said. That's me, Preston. He stared at the papers. His mouth opened, closed, opened again. Every survey your crews have run for 15 years used my patents. $8 million a year. Preston. The color left his hands. They hung at his sides like they'd been disconnected, all of it flowing through a holding company registered to the mechanic on the dirt lot. Preston's pale blue eyes went flat. Not angry, not calculating. Flat, like a screen going dark. The man who played general stood in my shop with no words left. My pulse was steady in my wrists. I could feel it against the denim of my jeans where my hands rested on my knees. Slow and even, the way a watch ticks when every piece is where it belongs. I let the silence hold for 10 seconds. Then I said what I'd come to say. You forged my brother's name. Thomas, the man standing right there. I pointed toward the pegboard where Thomas was sorting ratchets, humming to himself, unaware. The man who can't write cursive. The man who hands your grandchildren sparklers at my barbecue and sets an extra place at dinner when he thinks you're coming. You used him as a tool because you thought nobody would notice and nobody would care. My voice was low, steady. The words came out the way a torque wrench clicks at the right setting. That's why this is happening, I said. Not the land, not the money. Him. Preston's chest rose and fell. His jaw moved like he was chewing something that wouldn't break down. The revocation notices are already served, I said. 30 days. Every active project using my patents halts or faces infringement litigation. That's 3 developments. $24 million. Your banks will call the construction loans when the projects stall. Your subcontractors will file liens. The Mesilla corridor is over. I closed the folder. The DA's office is reviewing criminal forgery charges. 3 prior victims willing to testify. Your own paralegal's notary records creating a direct chain from the forged documents to your company. Deputy Weeks has the full evidence package. Preston's voice came back, rough, stripped of the folksy drawl. You can't do this. I built this valley. I have relationships that go back 30 years. You're a mechanic. This isn't a threat, Preston. We're past threats. This is arithmetic. He lunged, not a punch. A forward lurch across the workbench, hands reaching for the folder or for me, I wasn't sure which. His face was dark red now, the blood rushing back in, his eyes wide and wild. Bryce grabbed his father's arm, both hands, pulling him back. The son restraining the father. Dad, stop. I hadn't moved from my stool. Preston's breathing filled the shop. Ragged, harsh, the sound of a man who'd just discovered the ground he'd been standing on belonged to someone else. Bryce still had his arm. Neither of them looked at Tomas, who had stopped humming and was watching from his corner with his head tilted, the way he watches when something doesn't make sense. I sat on my stool with my hands on my knees, the folder between us, the licensing agreements visible, the battlefield map in the SUV catching the last of the morning sun. The general had lost. Preston straightened his blazer, pulled his arm free from Bryce, turned without a word, and walked out of my shop. His loafers left prints in the dirt. Bryce followed 3 steps behind, not beside. The Escalade doors closed. The engine started. They drove off the lot and turned south on Picacho, and the dust they raised hung in the air for a long time after the sound was gone. Preston and Bryce left the shop without another word. By Thursday, the first domino fell, and it wasn't from Preston's lawyers. It was from Marisol. Marisol called me Thursday morning. Her voice was flat in a way I recognized because it was the same flat I used when something was wrong and I hadn't decided what to do about it yet. "Dad, Bryce didn't come home last night. He won't answer his phone. Do you know what's happening?" "No," I said. That was the last lie I told my daughter. I knew exactly where Bryce had gone. I just wasn't ready to tell her yet. The 30-day revocation window expired that same week. Rita had timed the notices across all 14 entities so they'd landed in a single wave, and now the clock had run out on every one. By Friday, Preston's general contractor on the Manila corridor called his office and got no answer. By Monday, the contractor's attorney filed a work stoppage claim. By the following Thursday, every active license had lapsed. 3 developments, $24 million in exposed contracts. The Manila corridor, Preston's crown jewel, went dark first. I drove past the site once. A backhoe sat with its bucket in the dirt, engine cold, keys still in the ignition. The subcontractors didn't wait for explanations. They filed liens. 14 of them in the first 2 weeks, each one a separate claim against Latham Land Group's assets. The banks that had underwritten the construction loans sent notices of their own. Projects stalled past 30 days triggered default clauses. The loans came due. Preston's attorneys estimated total exposure at $24 million plus contract penalties. The country club house went on the market 3 weeks later. I drove past it once. The for sale sign stood in the manicured lawn where Preston had hosted fundraisers for city council candidates. The hedges were still trimmed. The sprinklers still ran on their timer. But the windows were dark. 6 weeks after I handed Weeks the full evidence package, the Doña Ana County District Attorney filed charges on a Tuesday. I read the courtesy copy at the kitchen table with coffee that went cold before I finished the second page. Criminal forgery under New Mexico, Section 30 to 16-2-10, 4th-degree felony. Exploitation of a vulnerable adult under Section 30 to 47-4 for forging the signature of a person with a cognitive disability, 3rd-degree felony carrying up to 3 years. 2 defendants, Preston Latham and Bryce Latham. Carla Munoz, Preston's paralegal of 8 years, cooperated with the prosecution the same week the charges were announced. Her attorney negotiated reduced charges in exchange for testimony. She gave the DA a timeline. Preston had ordered the forgery. She'd produced it. Bryce had delivered it. She provided dates, emails, and a memo in Preston's handwriting specifying which name to use on the witness statement. Thomas Davalos, written in Preston's own hand, requesting the cursive signature of a man who had never written cursive in his life. Helen Cordero testified. So did the other 2 victims. 3 separate cases spanning 7 years, each following the same pattern. The DA called it a criminal enterprise. The judge agreed. Deputy Angela Weeks served the arrest warrant at Latham Land Group's office, the same building on East Lowman Avenue, the same conference room with the granite table and the mountain view where Preston had expected me to crawl. She told me later that Preston was sitting at the head of the table when she walked in. He'd had weeks to prepare since the shop confrontation. He hadn't. He looked at the warrant and set it down on the granite like it was a lunch receipt. The New Mexico Real Estate Board opened disciplinary proceedings against Bryce the day after the charges were filed. The hearing lasted 40 minutes. His license was permanently revoked. No appeal, no reinstatement path. Bryce Latham had sold properties in developments his father built, using his father's connections, his father's name, his father's money. Without the license, he was a 34-year-old man with a firm handshake and nothing behind it. The Las Cruces Sun-News ran the story on the front page of the Wednesday edition. Developer charged with forgery, exploitation of disabled man. Preston's photo from a Chamber of Commerce dinner, smiling in his blazer. Thomas's name in the second paragraph. The article detailed the forged signature, the pattern of prior victims, the patent revocations, the $24 million in collapsed projects. It ran above the fold. Diana Latham was uninvited from the country club gala committee by phone call the following day. Preston's Wednesday golf foursome stopped returning his calls. The phone just rang. No voicemail, no callbacks, no explanation needed. The Latham name had opened every door in Doña Ana County for 30 years. Now it closed them. A disappearing act done without a word, one unanswered call at a time. Diana gave a statement to the Sun News that Friday, blamed Preston, said she knew nothing about the forgery or the pressure campaigns against property owners, filed for legal separation the next morning. I waited 2 weeks after the charges were filed before I sat Marisol down, not because I needed time, because she did. The news had reached her through the paper, through friends, through Bryce's increasingly desperate calls. But she didn't have the full picture yet. We sat at my kitchen table, the same table where she'd repeated Diana's talking points about Tomas deserving a group home. The same chairs, the same window with the evening light coming through, the same clock on the wall that had hung there since she was a girl. I set my phone between us and played the recording. Bryce's voice, easy and confident. "Dad, it's done." He's rattled. Preston's voice. The mechanic either signs or he doesn't, but either way, we get that land. My hands were flat on the table. Steady. My breathing was slow and even because one of us had to be. Marisol's hands were folded on the table. They didn't move. Her face didn't change. She listened to the whole recording without blinking, and the stillness in her was so deep it pulled the air out of the room. Then, I showed her the charity event records. The Latham Family Foundation sponsoring the gala. The teaching award that put her name on the guest list. The curated invitation. The timeline that placed Bryce at the same table as a 25-year-old schoolteacher whose father owned the last parcel on the Mesilla corridor. Her jaw tightened, a single muscle in her cheek. That was all. She stared at the documents for a long time. The kitchen was silent except for the refrigerator and the clock. Then she picked up her phone and called a lawyer. She came home 3 days later with one suitcase, set it inside the front door. The handle was still warm from her grip. She walked to the kitchen and poured a glass of water and drank it standing at the sink, looking out the window at the backyard where she'd played as a child. I didn't ask her anything. She didn't offer anything. We stood in the kitchen together, and the silence between us was not empty. It was the silence of two people who process the same way. Bryce called her 17 times that first week. I counted them one evening when she left her phone on the counter, and his name kept lighting up the screen. The counter vibrated with each call, a faint buzz against the laminate, and the glow pulsed in the dark kitchen like a heartbeat that wouldn't stop. She never answered, never listened to the voicemails. Never cried in front of me or Tomas or anyone else. She got that from me. I wished she hadn't. The weeks passed. Marisol filed the divorce papers. Preston posted bail and retreated behind his attorneys. The construction sites sat empty. The country clubhouse sold below, asking. The Sun News ran a follow-up, then another, each article naming Tomas. Each article showing the block letter signature beside the forged cursive. Each article making it harder for anyone to forget what Preston Latham had done to a man who set an extra place at dinner when he thought company was coming. Spring turned to summer. The construction sites grew weeds. 3 months later, I was under a Chevy Silverado when Tomas tapped my boot. "Sal, someone here. She says thank you." Loving this so far? Smash like and rate my story from 1 to 10 in the comments. Thank you for being here. I slid out from under the Silverado on the creeper, wiping my hands on the rag stuffed in my back pocket. The afternoon sun cut through the bay doors at a low angle and lit up the dust. Helen Cordero stood in the doorway, mid-60s, small-framed, reading glasses on a beaded chain. The retired teacher who'd been forced off her family's land 3 years ago for 60 cents on the dollar. She held a cloth tote bag against her hip and squinted into the shop like she wasn't sure she had the right place. "Mrs. Cordero," I said. She crossed the distance between us in 3 steps and took my hand in both of hers. Her grip was stronger than I expected, warm and dry, the kind of handshake that uses the whole arm. "You did what none of us could," she said. Her voice was steady, no tears. Teachers don't break down in front of people. They save it for after. Thomas appeared from his corner with a folding chair in one hand and a bottle of water from the cooler in the other. The chair legs scraped concrete as he set it in the shade of the bay door. "Here you go, ma'am. It's hot today." "Thank you, Tomas," she said. He smiled and went back to his pegboard. "Ratchets today, sorting by drive size." Helen sat down and told me about the restitution hearing. Preston got 3 years. Bryce got 18 months. Helen's family property couldn't be returned, but the court awarded her $212,000 in damages, the difference between what Latham paid and what the land was worth. The Latham Land Group sign came down on a Tuesday. Nobody took photographs. Helen stayed for 20 minutes. When she left, she shook my hand again the same way. Both hands, full grip. Then she walked to her car and drove south toward Anthony, and the dust from her tires settled on the lot the same way it always settled. I stood in the shop doorway and let the quiet fill the space she'd left. 3 months. That's how long it had been, and the cost was still settling into my bones like cold into concrete. I'd spent weeks running on nothing but anger and black coffee and the image of Thomas's name in someone else's handwriting. Months where every conversation was strategy and every silence was calculation. The look on Marisol's face when I played the recording at the kitchen table. Recognition. The moment she understood that the man who danced with her at her wedding had been assigned to her like a surveyor to a parcel. She didn't cry. I wished she had. And Tomas. 2 weeks after Bryce stopped coming around, Tomas set an extra place at Sunday dinner. I didn't say anything. He cleared it after an hour. The next Sunday, he didn't set it. He never mentioned Bryce again. I'd do all of it again. Every recording, every filing, every sleepless night with the photographs glowing on my phone. But it took something from me I haven't named yet. Something between my shoulder blades that doesn't quite release. Marisol was back at Mesilla Elementary, 10 minutes from the shop. 4th grade. She came for dinner on Sundays. Quieter than before, but present. She'd started helping Thomas water the window boxes out front. Neither of them talked much while they did it. They didn't need to. Thomas still organized wrenches by size, still greeted every customer by full name, still wore his shop polo with the name badge pinned straight. Everything I'd set in motion had passed over his head without touching him. That was the whole point. That evening, after the last customer left and Thomas walked home, I sat at the watch workbench under the single lamp. An 1880s Hamilton Railroad watch lay open under the loupe, its movement exposed. I held the replacement hairspring with brass tweezers, no thicker than an eyelash, and guided it into position. The coil seated against the balance wheel, and I pressed it home with a tool, the width of a sewing needle. My hands were steady. The spring caught. The balance wheel moved. The shop was quiet. Not the silence of someone measuring my property line. Not the silence of a safe standing open. Just quiet. Motor oil and clean metal and the last of the sun through the bay doors. I turned to a clean page in the leather notebook. Date acquired. What was wrong with it? What I did to fix it? Just a catalog of watches again. People think patience is passive. It's not. Patience is a decision you make every single morning to not act yet. A watch works because every piece is in the right place at the right time. So does justice. If someone is using the people you love as leverage, don't move fast. Move right. Document everything before you make a single call. And when you do make that call, make sure the arithmetic is already done. That's my story. If you want more like it, subscribe and hit the bell. And share this with someone who needs justice.